I promise you, I will not let you down.
The trucks parked outside illegally should move.
Canada's Conservatives will meet our Paris climate commitment.
Enough with the woke. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I take that back.
To champion our conservative principles.
We are the party of law and order.
To call in the auditors.
We haven't yet decided whether we're going to call for the government to impose a mandatory test or vaccination.
And we will win the next election. Canada must not ignore the reality of climate change.
Why weren't Canadians vaccinated in January and February like everyone else?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Controlled Opposition, episode 21. I'm your host, Greg Wycliffe. We have a great show planned for you this evening. We're going to be talking about, of course, the one and only Toronto Sun's starlet, the conservative journalist, Brian Lilley. And we're going to be watching some of his more recent subversive behavior and also some of his subversive behavior from the past. And I'm going to be talking about the aftermath of what we're dealing with right now in Canada. You know, I was someone who was very hyped up about this by-election with Max Bernier in Portage Lisgar to get back in the House of Commons. And of course, he lost big time. And I was also very excited for the Toronto election to get Chris Sky in as mayor. And he also lost big time. There's a lot of thoughts and feelings I have around that I think are important to share. And of course, like I said, with Brian Lilley, he's another great example of somebody who is, I think, leading us astray in the Canadian news landscape. I hope everybody is doing super well. You're going to have to bear with me because I feel like I'm having a seniors moment right now. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. It's just, I'm very out of sorts today, but, we are going to make it work. I haven't streamed in a few weeks, so I'm like, I got to get on here. I got to talk to the folks. I got to let them know what's happening in the world of subversion and Canadian politics. There's actually a lot of other things going on when it comes to subversion. Let me tell you, there's no shortage of it. There's a lot of weird things going on with, people at the Daily Wire, and they're like, where did wokeism come from? We have no idea where wokeism came from. And Jordan Peterson's like, we don't know where wokeism came from. And it's like, Jordan Peterson, you are a professor, a very well-read professor. And I went to university, and I can even tell you where wokeism came from. It came from the Frankfurt School in Germany. That's where Karl Marx came from. So it's very weird that all these people at the Daily Wire are talking about wokeism, but have no idea where it came from. But that'll be another episode. It's an episode I'm very, very excited to get into. But I'm going to talk about the Brian Lilley stuff in a bit. I'd like to kind of get people up to speed with, how I'm kind of feeling and how I think people should be feeling after these two big losses, after these two big L's in the by-election with Max Bernier, and then of course with Chris Sky. And I wrote a Twitter thread last week about this kind of like ideas. So I'm going to use that as a guide and kind of add to it as I go. So Max and the PPC lost big last night. And along with Chris Sky, although Chris Sky did get a lot of official votes on the ballot. And, you hate to see it. I'm just going to keep that for myself. You guys don't need to see that, right? Yeah. So we lost, okay? We lost. We're losing. We are losing. As people who oppose globalism and globalist policies, we oppose the UN, we oppose the Sustainable Development Agenda, we oppose all of these things, and we're losing. We're losing big time. There might be some wins here in the cultural arena, like with things like Josh Alexander or Billboard Chris, where we're seeing, more people come into the fray and start to fight against these social issues. But when it comes to being someone who opposes globalism and trying to gain institutional power, we are losing big time. But a lot of people desperately or kind of in a frustrated sense, they'll blame it on these dumb voters. You know, they just got to smarten up. These dumb voters just got to smarten up. They gotta be more intelligent like me. And I got to tell you, this is not a smart approach. This is not a smart approach because people, sorry to break it to you folks, people are not going to magically become smart. People are not going to magically get it. And something that politics thrives off of is this sort of, lowest common denominator, harsh truth about reality, which is, and I've said this maybe before on the show, but 80% of people, the majority of people are sort of like, medium to low intelligence type people. And if you are following and watching Control Opposition, there's a good chance you might be part of that 20% who's a little bit more high IQ, a little bit more engaged, a little bit more knowing or paying attention to what's going on. And it's important to know this because saying, oh, why can't more people just be smarter? Then we would win. You're just being a sore loser. You're just being a sore loser. I'm not saying like you specifically, but I'm saying like, this is something that people who oppose globalism or nationalists or, Canada firsters, whatever label you want to put on it. I kind of like, I hesitate to use anti-globalism as a catch-all because it's like anti to define it. But when you look at all the different groups and all the goals, like it is to oppose this, globalist takeover. It is a pretty good kind of catch-all. And, like, as I said, we're losing and we're losing big. We're not losing a little bit. We're losing big. And I'm finding all these different copes that people have. These are copes. A cope is something like, oh, you're coping with the fact that you're losing. So you have to kind of like tell yourself something or tell others something to kind of deal with the fact that you're not doing very well. And blaming it on the dumb voters is something that I've done in the past and that I still want to do. It's still tempting to just kind of like, you know what, instead of accepting the fact that we're losing so bad, I'm just going to blame it on the fact that people are dumb. And the reason why I, discourage people from doing this is because, well, then you're just kind of passing the buck off to, oh, well, we're going to keep losing because these people are dumb. Right. And it's like, well, OK, so I guess there's nothing we can do about it. I guess it's over then, like it's kind of a defeatist kind of attitude. It's a terminal sort of thing. Sure, it is a reality that there's dumb voters. But as I'm going to get into here, like the point is like we're not winning elections. We're not winning institutional power and we're not professionally organized enough to actually win. And another thing that people blame it on the corrupt system. Well, the voting is fake. The voting is fake. And let me tell you, after this Toronto election, I'm starting to really, really start to believe that. I'm really starting to believe that, maybe these elections are quite rigged in one way or another. And I think I have to be careful because I'm on YouTube here, but I say that. I would normally not really say that because I'm like, really, are they rigged? But, I'll play a clip here in a sec. But, when I was hanging out with Chris Sky during this campaign, anytime I was with him in public in Toronto, we could not go more than a block without somebody stopping to say hello to this person. It happens like so many times. The one morning I worked out with him, we walked like 3 blocks. There was like 5 people who stopped to say hello to him. This was like somewhere in like North York. And it's like, people know this guy. People know this guy. People are passionate. People are like going up to like shake his hand. And to see that he didn't even get 10,000 votes, really? The other thing, I'll get into we'll get into like the way that you might be able to duplicate your votes or have dead people vote or have non-citizens vote in these elections, federal elections. I don't know. But aside from that, what I was thinking of is what did I do after I filled out my ballot in Toronto? I put it into a machine. And I'm like, the fate of our democracy is in this like Scantron machine. If you ever did like multiple choice in like university or college, it's just like you put it into the Scantron and it tells you if what your mark is. And that might seem like, oh, Greg, what are you saying? Are you saying about blah, 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 blah? Well, we all know about Dominion voting machines, of course. And to put it another way, we have all seen how inefficient the bureaucracy in Canada is. Like these different arms of bureaucracy in Canadian politics federal, municipal, provincial. You know, it's pretty inefficient, these bureaucratic bodies. And it was a bureaucratic body who gave this contract of the voting machine to somebody. So it's like, it's up to bureaucrats to hire the right people to get this voting machine in place. And that's the fate of our democracy, is right there on that machine. And I think the other real, I'm going on a whole tangent here about voter fraud and questioning elections here. But the point that I think is even more interesting is, and this is why crying about the corrupt system is not a productive thing, which is, if it's not a popular talking point, the system being corrupt, if it's not as, like, it's a very popular thing in the States, for example, ever since the last election, where people who voted for Trump feel like the election was rigged and blah, blah, blah. But now that's a popular sentiment among a lot of Americans. And now it's like a talking point. It's a thing that people grab onto. It's a thing that people connect with on one another on a massive scale. I'm talking millions of people who think that their elections were fraudulent. That is not the case here in Canada. But if we truly believe this is happening, we need to make that the case, where there are enough people, a large amount of people, who all do believe that these elections are fake and gay. Okay? And that's never going to happen until we actually test it and get evidence and prove it, and or at least, start to talk about it a lot. And of course, Chris Sky has been sure enough talking about that. Let me get that. So this first clip here from Chris. So, update on voter fraud. One man got 3 voter cards. More to come.
So now that we have exposed irrefutable evidence of voter fraud and irrefutable evidence that compromises the integrity of this election without question, guess what? More and more people are coming forward and giving us more and more evidence. So I just got off the phone with a gentleman who had gotten 3 voter registration cards. 1 to his condo, 1 for his house, and 1 for his business. He also had 3 separate licenses because he changed his address multiple times throughout the last couple of years, and they don't take your old card. So he had 3 voter cards with 3 licenses where he could have easily went and voted 3 times. Just another example. We had another woman say she got 2 voter registration cards, 1 in her married name and 1 in her maiden name. So there's so many discrepancies already popping up to prove that there was massive amounts of fraud. We also know, and we're going to try to have people sign affidavits to this, that on the day of the early voting, people were able to go to multiple stations, not just one. So it was also easy enough for people to go to different stations, even with the same ID, because they don't check cross-referencing, and vote multiple times in the early voting. And I had people testify that they had people tell them that they voted up to 5 times in the early voting.
You know, some of you might hear that and think, oh, like, that's crazy. That only just, that's a few votes here and there. That's a few votes here and there. But guys, like this, we're not talking about some sort of rigged circus game. You know, we're not talking about some game at the fair that's rigged. We're talking about our democracy, right? We're talking about our elections. So even if there is one example of someone voting multiple times, one piece of evidence of someone voting multiple times, hello, ring the alarm bells. That's a big deal. That's an issue. That's a problem. And my commentary on it was quite simple, which is, has anyone actually tested the integrity of elections in Canada? Or have we all just taken it for granted? Even if there's evidence of one person, like I said, voting twice, that should be enough cause for investigation. And there's 3 things there pretty well that were listed. Someone voting multiple times. Actually, sorry, I don't think Chris covered this in the whole video, but my understanding is, because this was actually on the Toronto elections website. It says, you can only vote once. You can only vote once. If you vote more than once, you'll get in trouble. Is there any example of somebody getting in trouble for voting multiple times? How do they track that? How do they measure that? Let's face it, we have mass migration in Canada. There's probably a lot of different people named Muhammad. How are you gonna check the Muhammad? How do you know Muhammad didn't vote for Muhammad? Is that the same Muhammad? You know, like how would you know? How would anyone enforce that? It's a pretty valid question, and no one seems to have any answers. The only answers was in the community notes, which essentially said the same thing. Let me bring it up here. Someone in community noted, Chris said, a valid ID showing a name and Toronto address is required before voting. A person owning multiple properties could potentially receive multiple voter information cards, but would only be able to register their name and information to vote once. That may be true. You may be only able to register their name and information to vote once, but if you're going straight to the voting booth to vote, you can register at every single voting booth. Do they tap it into an iPad? No, they don't. When I went there, they wrote it on a piece of paper. Oh, what's your name? Okay. Oh, I'm going to register you right now. It's like a blank piece of paper. It's like an empty table. Just put name, this, that. You could go to so many different. I mean, I've moved in the past 4 years since the last election, so I was thinking about going to my other area to see if it would work. But I thought, you know what? Nah. I'm wishing I would have at least checked. I wouldn't have voted twice because that's a crime. Of course not. But I would have at least checked to see if there was any sort of fail-safe there. But that's just one. 2 different addresses, people who have deceased and still get voter cards. And the other one is new people to this country, new people who are not even residents of Canada. Because from what I can tell, you need ID and an address in Toronto. You need ID and an address in Toronto, and then a single piece of mail to say that you're in that area. And this might sound crazy, but if you are a power-hungry psychopath who wants to subvert Canada and you just want the power for yourself to, instigate whatever policies you want in this country, guess what? The incentive to manipulate elections any way you can is there. So you're going to find any way you can do it. And it's a huge benefit if you are manipulating elections that no one is looking into this. And this is something I've talked about before on previous podcasts, not this show, but just when I'm kind of pontificating about the ails of Canadian society. One of them is the lack of accountability that Canadians seem to have on our own systems and our own people. There's this sort of hey bro, it's all good, man. I'm just going to have a beer and just relax. It's all good. Oh yeah, they're all corrupt anyway. Is someone going to look into this? Is someone going to look into this this whole thing that our elections might be fraudulent or easily manipulatable? No, everyone's too messed up. Everyone's too drunk. Everyone's too drunk and high to care about that. Whereas in the States, you have people who are total obsessive autistics where it's this is our Constitution. How dare you? These are the details. Here is one, and they'll just point at one. They'll point at one vote that was fraudulent and say, this is totally unacceptable. This is totally unacceptable. We don't have that same urgency here in Canada, and we need it. And that's why I'm very happy to see Chris Sky kind of, again, sort of crusading over something like this, because I do think it's very, very important that we at least start this conversation. Because, another comment I made is oh wait, could this just be a well-kept secret? Maybe all the establishment parties already know this and they're just exploiting it. They're just totally exploiting these our democracy and figuring out loopholes to getting all sorts of people to voting multiple times, and they probably show off to their friends. Yeah, I got a whole retirement residence to vote 4 times each because I'm a scumbag and I don't, I'm just speculating here. I'm just speculating. And the reason I think it's important to speculate is have people speculated over this, about the specifics, about how easy or hard it is to vote multiple times? This seems, we love, all these people love to talk about democracy, right? Love to talk about democracy. But, yeah, it is a concern, and it needs to become popular. Back to my whole thing about politics and us beating the globalists. It needs to become popular, because the thing about politics is you can't escape it. Okay, at the end of the day, politics is moving a large enough group of people in the same direction to affect change in some way. And if there's a bunch of scattered people across Canada who thinks there's rigged elections, that's not very meaningful. But if there's someone like Chris Sky leading a crusade of people who are like, you know what, I think these elections are rigged, and it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger group, and there's evidence and they're making sense, and maybe they're actually quite professional, and there's actually a lot of evidence laid out online, or this information is accessible and consumable by the masses, by that 80% of people who have a medium to low intelligence. Whoa, is rigged? Then we have something going on there. Then that becomes us winning, because that becomes a popular idea that people start to understand. So hopefully that made sense. And the one other thing I'll say about, rigged elections or what have you is, I mean, it's like, I don't know much about programming, but like, what is the audit system of when all these votes go into the computer? Like, can we audit the vote? Can we make sure that there wasn't duplicates? How about we campaign for that? That's like, who would not want to see that? You want to make sure it's a fair election, right? Like, how can an honest politician not want to agree and say, yeah, okay, sure, it's a fair election? And it's very interesting to think about this, because it's like, has anyone tested this? Has anyone tested the integrity of Canadian elections? Seems like it's kind of an important thing, especially after the whole Dominion voting systems debacle, etc. Lee Stewie in chat says, that's why I scrutineered last federal election to see what they do. LOL. Yeah, what do they do? What do they do? I think it was actually, was it Stalin or Mao? I think it was Stalin or Mao who had a famous quote. Let's see if I can find it. So Joseph Stalin said, I consider it completely unimportant who in the party will vote or how. But what is extraordinarily important is this: who will count the votes and how. That's some evil conniving stuff right there. But so let me get back to this to my thread here about how we're losing to the globalists. I kind of got sidetracked there on the whole corrupt system. So blaming the loss on dumb voters is a cope. It's saying, okay, I'm going to blame it on the fact that people are stupid. It's like, well, no, that's not good enough. That is just admitting defeat. It's not productive. It's not admitting the fact that we could be improving as people who are opposing globalism. And same thing with the corrupt system. Hey, the system's corrupt anyway. Guess we're just going to give up and do nothing. And as I was just saying, even if the voting is rigged, we can still try to make this idea popular. We can still try to bring this to the forefront, like it has been happening, in the States with Trump and with what happened in 2020. Because then that becomes a galvanizing and powerful talking point that, hey, are these things rigged? And people might say, well, like, what are you talking about? We don't know what winning looks like against these globalists, okay? Like, we don't know what winning looks like. And if you look at what's happened on January 6th at the trucker convoy, apparently winning means you get called a terrorist. That's part of what winning looks like. It's like, you push the system, you push this corrupt system, these globalist politicians to their brink, and they react like that. They react crazy, and they show more of their hand, and more people come into the fold, and the urgency increases, and like, that is part of the path forward. I'm sorry, I like, what other way is there than to force a tyrant to act like one, right? But yeah, so back to my thread here. The lesson from the PPC election with Maxime Bernier, assuming the numbers are real, and let's just say for argument's sake that assuming the numbers from Chris Sky are real, the lesson has always been the same since I've been in politics, since following it since 2015, 2016. Well, maybe more accurately 2019. The PPC and anti-globalists these people like, freedom fighters, we are in an echo chamber online. Okay. And so part of this problem we need to solve is the fact that we're in that echo chamber and the fact that we are struggling to win elections. We are struggling to win elections and we are struggling to organize professionally. And the solution is obviously not simple. And another way to look at it is like, the anti-globalist movement in Canada is like an infant. It's like a baby. What's the first like anti-globalist thing that's even existed in Canada recently? It's probably Bernier and the PPC. There's probably a few other things before that was talking about the UN Sustainable Development Agenda. But like recently, like the biggest pieces have been the PPC and then the trucker convoy and people like Chris Sky. And maybe you can throw Billboard Chris in there and like, some others. Like that is it. And that's only since 2019. Whereas globalism, these people who are, trying to infiltrate our way of life and impose their own rules upon us for like from a trans, national situation, that's been happening for years and decades. They've been planning this for a long time now, the United Nations. So, we're up against a lot and we're playing catch up. And this anti-globalist movement in Canada is a baby. We are a baby. Goo goo gaga. We're still pooping our pants. So obviously we're not doing that well. We're not winning elections yet, right? And yeah, I mean, I'll address, because I've kind of like butted heads with a friend of mine, the Ferryman's Toll, who's a very, very sweet Dutchman, part of Diagolon. He is like a prolific memester. And he's said recently, like, voting is gay. Basically, voting is gay. Voting is stupid. Oh, we just need to vote harder. And like, encouraging people to vote is part of the problem. And I totally disagree with that because, after the election, obviously everyone was upset. We were kind of holding out and hoping that maybe we'll get a win, but everyone was upset because we lost. And it's like, well, if we won, we wouldn't be so upset. Or if we did better, we wouldn't be so upset. So it's like, even if you say, oh, the elections don't matter, obviously you're still invested in what's going to happen. And it actually reminds me of something that this is actually something I heard. Oh my God, excuse me. It was actually an entrepreneur who was giving advice to this person who was not in a good spot. This person was very like poor, basically. This person was poor, trying to better their situation. And this entrepreneur said to them, you're poor and you're probably surrounded by poor people, your family members, your friends. And that is really super challenging because everyone around you has this, poor mindset. And everything that you try to do to work and get ahead, they're going to kind of poo-poo and say like, hey, that's pointless, bro. Like they're going to laugh at you for trying to better yourself. And the hardest part is they're basically going to be right. When you're trying to work harder and better yourself and get out of that situation, they're gonna be like, why are you doing that for? Like, that's such a waste of time. You're such a loser. Like, why are you even trying? And in many ways, they're going to be right. They're going to be absolutely right about that. But until that person who's working hard and until they succeed, and once they succeed, then they're dead wrong. Then all of those doubters, all of those people who have been doubting them and saying all these things, and although they were right at the time, now that they've succeeded, they're dead wrong. And it's this exact same thing with us anti-globalists. Yes, we're trying to fight globalism. We're trying to do this. We're trying to start this organization, that organization. We're trying to get elected. We're getting beaten down. People, oh, what's the point? You suck. You're not going anywhere. You're terrible. And they're right. They're right. They're a lot of the criticisms that people have for the PPC and Max and anybody who's trying to change the country. Yeah, we get crapped on. And it's, I hate to say it, but they kind of got a point. Yeah, you know what? We're actually not doing that well. We're actually shit. We're actually losing. We're losing and losing and losing again. And it's tough and it sucks. But like That's part of the struggle. And it's only until we actually succeed and win when they will be dead wrong. And that is part of the progress forward, guys. It's part of just like banging our head into the wall over and over again when it's not easy, when it's not fun. And it's obviously easier said than done. But I actually want to bring up another Chris Sky clip, which really relates to this. It really relates to like why we should really have hope in continuing this this ongoing battle against these globalist overlords. And I'll play the clip first. So Chris Sky says, "I've never been more inspired in my life, and it's by the youth of this great nation. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." This was on election day. He made this video.
All I can say is all day long, I've been getting calls from 18 and 19-year-olds who said they just voted for me. This is the most inspiring thing that could have ever come out of this election, and you guys have truly touched my hearts. I've been fighting for you for 3 years. I've been saying I've been trying to represent the youth, and to see the youth come out like this, like they never have before, is the most inspiring thing I've ever witnessed in my life. Thank you all. No matter what happens today, you guys made my day already. But if you haven't gone out and voted yet, get your ass to the voting stations and vote number 82, Chris Sakocha for mayor.
And the reason why I think it's so important to bring this up is because I'm gonna tell another story. Actually, a friend of mine is an addictions counselor. Okay, they're an addictions counselor. They work at a halfway house or like a rehab house. People come in who are, they're down on their luck. It's not fun. It's not, obviously these people are in a bad place. And it's a magical thing when someone who is in rehab can come back from that. They can come back from that and they can go from being in a self-destructive state to helping out and becoming a productive member of society, getting their feet back under them. It's an amazing thing. And this friend of mine who's an addiction counselor was driving around with a friend of theirs, and they saw someone who was messed up on drugs outside of the car. And they were saying how it's like this new drug called like crank or something. Apparently there's this new drug out there that like you literally act like a zombie. You're completely zonked out or something like this. And his friend said like he was just kind of demoralized by it. He was kind of overwhelmed with the feeling of being just kind of like the misery, commiserating over this, because it's not just this person on drugs. It's like there's so many. It represents this huge bane in our society of drug addiction. And like he was just talking about how horrible it is and how many things are going wrong and how it's just so overwhelming. And as somebody who is awake to what's going on politically, that's very relatable, right? There are a lot of things going on that are overwhelming. There is everything from mass migration to drug addiction to they're trying to take our freedom of speech away online and on and on. It's just, the indoctrination of our children. It's insanity. That's what's going on. And it is overwhelming. But what my friend said to this person, my addictions counselor friend said, is you can't look at the mass of the problem. You can't just say, look at all this drug addiction, what I'm going to do. But what you can do is you can focus on saving one soul. You can focus your time and energy on saving one soul, because that's realistic. And as my friend who is an addictions counselor, that's what they do. Obviously, they focus on one person at a time. They're not going to solve drug addiction. Just like myself or anyone watching, we're not going to solve globalism. We're not going to just stop it all and just shooting something into the Death Star and the whole Death Star blows up. It's not that simple. But we can focus on saving one soul, or another way, calling out one demon. Stopping when maybe you're fighting your own demon, or maybe the soul you're saving is your own. You know, like that, like those like little steps, that's really all we can do and all we can focus on, because it's true. Trying to solve this big problem, it's totally overwhelming. And that's why I wanted to bring up that clip from Chris, because like I said, the anti-globalist movement in Canada is new. It's like a baby that's just learning to walk. There's still so many Canadians who are only waking up and just coming into the fray. You know, they're wide-eyed. They're totally innocent to how politics works. You know, they're in for a rude awakening as they go down their red pill journey, but they're slowly coming into the fray. And a great example is the clip I just showed you of Chris Sky connecting with young people who are like, hey, I voted for you. Those people aren't going to go away, especially if they're young. They are going to stick around. Where do you think that energy is going to go? Where do you think that time and energy is going to go? It's going to go into something, and it's probably not going to be some globalist nonsense, because it's very hard to go back into the matrix, as they say. It's hard to go back to becoming blue-pilled. So it's very important to hold on to that, to hold on to that hope of hey, I'm not going to solve all these problems, but maybe I can save one soul. Maybe I can focus on saving one soul. And I really think that's the way people have to look at it, because another thing that I think people do when they're kind of like overwhelmed by all of the losing and we're losing, we can't win, is they try to look for like one solution that's like going to solve everything. And I think that's just kind of a psychological thing that human beings, you know, want and gravitate towards. When in reality, it's like, you know, you got to kind of stick to your day to day and just really look at what you're capable of and what you can like reasonably accomplish, instead of thinking, oh, well, I'm only going to be happy if this happens. I'm only going to be happy if that happens. Anyway, we're kind of, you know, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but I think you get the idea in terms of what I was talking about there. So yeah, as I said, the problem is we're struggling to win elections. We're struggling to organize against globalism. It's tough. It's hard. We're struggling. You know, we're not going to solve this all at once, but slowly but surely people are coming into the fray. And how do we win? Like I said, we need to better capture the hearts and minds of more Canadians. We need to break out of our echo chamber. We need to organize more professionally. We need to be disruptive. And, you know, I'm going to get into this more later. I was really, you know, let's face it, I was shilling for the PPC. I was shilling for Chris Sky because I wanted them to win. It was game day. But there's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of constructive criticisms I have for the PPC, and I have for Chris Sky for his next campaign, in terms of being more effective, in terms of being better, having better messaging, better leadership, better propaganda, being more professional and being more organized, because this is what it comes down to. It comes down to winning elections. Like, or at least like that is one of the fronts. I don't want to say that's the only front. That's not what I'm trying to say. When I was shilling for them hard because it's like the election day is like this month, this week. So we should be encouraging people to go and vote and do that whole thing. But it was game day, you know. Now that it's not game day, it's time to practice. It's time to look at other things. It's time to try and improve the PPC as much as possible and push them in the best possible direction, you know, and give them feedback and be like, hey, Max, you got to be better at this. Hey, PPC HQ, you got to be better at that. You know, and really push them and you know, train them and really be where they need to be be successful. Because I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, because, you know, something's going to happen with them. Something's going to happen with the PPC in terms of making moves, you know. But we still got to talk about Brian Lilley, so I don't want to get too distracted here. But better messaging. What else? Yeah. So yeah. Again, it won't happen overnight. You know, solving these problems, actually getting institutional power. It's not going to happen overnight. Could take years. Hopefully it happens in under a decade. But, and it won't just be the PPC. It won't just be politicians. It'll be other organizations. National Citizens Inquiry is a great example, a professional organization that is impacting change and actually doing something, and as a reminder, we are up against organized establishment professionals. Okay. These, globalist organizations, these globalist politicians, they've been doing this for decades. They've been trained to do this. So we're up against a lot. The fact that we're losing, it's like, no, it's no big surprise. We're up against pros. And these pros also have an insane foothold in our institutions. Okay. So it's like, don't feel so bad that we're losing because it is tough out there. You know what? I'll save that for another time. I talked about saving one soul at a time, but also we have to call out one demon at a time. And of course, the demon tonight is going to be Brian Lilley. Brian Lilley. I mean, why it pains me to do this is because sometimes they do get it right. Sometimes they do have a good article. Sometimes they do have a good take. But as I mentioned in my last episode, calling out Andrew Lawton and some other people who are like crapping on Maxime Bernier at the precisely wrong moment, it's when, these people may be doing great things, but like they let you down at like a really important moment. Almost like the most important moment and the most important thing. And I thought to start it off, like I forgot about this actually. I forgot this was Brian Lilley who did this. But this whole statement from Pierre Poilievre about Christine Anderson came from Brian Lilley. Brian Lilley was the one who tweeted out this infamous text box that was from Pierre Poilievre. So if you don't remember, Pierre Poilievre disavowed Christine Anderson or disavowed, the fact that MPs were meeting with this vile person. This was from Pierre Poilievre, apparently, tweeted out by Brian Lilley. Christine Anderson's views are vile and have no place in our politics. The MPs were not aware of this visiting member of the European Parliament's opinions, and they regret meeting with her. I'm just realizing now how arrogant is this of Pierre Poilievre to be like, I'm going to speak for those MPs, and they regret meeting her. Really? You're just going to speak? You're going to speak for your fellow MPs? Anyway, frankly, it would be better if Anderson never visited Canada in the first place. She and her racist, hateful views are not welcome here. I doubt Pierre Poilievre even said that. Has he even ever said anything that bold before? No, I don't know if he has the balls to say that. But the point being, this came from Brian Lilley. Miraculously, Brian Lilley was the guy. He was the guy to channel this message to the Canadian Conservatives out there. Statement from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on the 3 Conservative MPs who met with European MEP Christine Anderson earlier this week. And, let's face it, this show is about controlled opposition. That implies that there is a lot of coordination. It's controlled, it's coordinated, it's organized in some fashion, potentially behind the scenes. What do we have here exactly? We have Pierre Poilievre sending Brian an image. Hey, hey bro, can you tweet this out for me? Why? Has anyone answered that question yet? What did Brian say? I wonder how all the idiots who thought this was a fake statement from Pierre Poilievre are reacting to him showing up at a rally for Ukraine and sharing the stage with Trudeau and Ford and saying Canada stands with Ukraine. Your Putin-loving heads must be exploding. Just total disingenuous, total who are these people? At one moment you're like, oh yeah, I kind of like Brian Lilley. I kind of like the Sun. And then it's like, what the hell is this, dude? What the hell is this? It's I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. I don't even know what to say to that, Mr. Lilley. I don't even know what to say to that. This is another one. We're just going to go through some greatest hits here of Mr. Brian Lilley. All I had to do was search my own Twitter of times that I tweeted at him. But this is another great one. And keep in mind, we're going to come back to this one a couple times. All right, I'll make it bigger so maybe you can read it. Remember when I was muted for 20 minutes? Brian Lilley tweeted this March 20th, 2021. Every single day I hear from doctors, lawyers, engineers, small business owners, frontline workers, people impacted by the pandemic with layoffs. Yet as soon as I write about teachers, they and their supporters dismiss all Sun readers, illiterate mouth breathers. They are wrong. Yeah. You know, just like that whole sentiment of like, the layoffs are so tough. The layoffs are so tough, says Brian Lilley. He's subsidized by the feds because he's a journalist, but he's man. It's hard to do this without being like super inappropriate and offensive. Like I'm just like all these expletives are just like, you know, cycling through my head here. What else do we got here? Let's go. So let's bring it up to the recent Toronto election because this is where it gets like really goofy. This gets really actually before that. This is good. Before we get to the Toronto election thing. This was August 2020. Aaron O'Toole is not a real conservative, Maxime Bernier says. And then in this thread, we have basically Brian Lilley praising Warren Kinsella. Apparently, Brian Lilley and Kinsella are buddies. As for Kinsella, I think he should be back in the Sun. We have more diversity of opinion in our paper than any other. We battle it out for the best ideas. You know, I don't know. I forget whose tweet was deleted here. Can I see? I don't know whose tweet was deleted there. But here's Brian Lilley again. You know, standing for Warren Kinsella because he isn't a slander merchant. He's a friend who I oppose in politics. It's always funny, how these people claim to be on opposite sides of the political aisle, but totally team up with one another. I've known Max for near 14 years. He let idiots into positions of power in this party who are racist and made it easy for his opponents. And it's like he's a journalist. Like Brian Lilley's a journalist, and it came out that there was money that traded hands to slander Max Bernier, right? And I responded by simply saying, where'd it go? Let the hatred you have for Maxime Bernier wash over you like a purifying force. This was something that Warren Kinsella said in like some leaked audio having to do with that whole attack on Maxime Bernier. So it's just disgusting that Brian Lilley is going to defend Warren Kinsella, who is basically caught being a smear merchant, and then say he's not a slander merchant. And it's like, what are you even talking about? You're supposed to be a journalist who cares about the facts, but instead you're going to stand up for like probably arguably, maybe not arguably, there's a lot of disgusting people in Canadian politics, but he's standing up for one of the most like disgusting, vile people who has like, you know, a lot of conservative politicians don't have a spine or a backbone, but like somebody like Warren Kinsella is an actual bottom feeder. Like he's an actual amoeba, you know, like he's an actual, like he is a very, 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 very low life form. Like one of the lowest, but, yeah, I'll smear anybody, you know. Or I laugh because one of the fun things about Canadian politics I find is the more you learn about like how disgusting these people are, like if you keep a light spirit about it, it's almost inspiring to know how tormented their souls probably are. You know, it's like, sure, maybe they have these power and this connections and like they're accomplishing things, but it's like, you must hate yourself. Like it must be so hard for you to live with yourself, Warren Kinsella or Brian Lilley. You know, like it's actually funny. I laugh at you. I pity you because that must be terrible to have to live with yourself. You know, I sleep like a log. I'm fine. But, Yeah, so finally, let's bring it to this Toronto mayoral election. Brian Lilley tweets like the day of the election. Good to see Chris Sky believes in democracy. He puts his name on the ballot. The voters took a look at him and rejected him. Now he's claiming the election is a fraud. Will his supporters chant "Stop the Steal" at rallies? Truth is, Chris Sakocha was never a serious candidate. Okay, so Chris Sakocha was like one of the 6 candidates, like out of the almost 100 candidates, he was one of 6, I think, that actually had a campaign office. He had massive events. He had a lot going on. And when when the different candidates were officially filing their papers to run as a Toronto mayor, guess who had a massive crowd with them when they signed up? Chris Sakocha. None of the other candidates had this. And to make it even more crazy, this is me tweeting this out at Brian Lilley. Sketchbag Brian Lilley tweeted about every Toronto mayoral candidate that registered today except for Chris Sky. He knows who Chris is. He knows he's running for mayor, and he probably saw the crowd of supporters with Chris Sky. He tweeted about every single, here he is with Josh Matlow. Here he is with Mark Saunders. Here he is talking about Mitzi Hunter, talking about this person, Blake Acton, Anthony Fury. And of course, here's a tweet from a while ago, him saying that he knows Chris Sky. So he's gonna talk about every other candidate except Chris Sky. And then conveniently, days after the election, he's like, oh yeah, Chris Sky believes it. Like he starts to make fun of Chris Sky after the election. It's totally like just gross behavior. It's totally gross behavior because once again, as we've covered on the show many times, Brian Lilley is somebody who constantly profits off of the clicks of the things that we care about and that Chris Sky cares about. Things that Chris Sky will care about or talk about, like crime, like corruption, like everything that happened during the pandemic. Brian Lilley will be the first to talk about those stories. Oh, I got the scoop on this. Hey, the corruption. Hey, this. Hey, yeah. You people care about that, don't you? And then when there's a people's candidate like Chris Sky, who's actually trying to make a change, he acts like he doesn't exist. He acts like he doesn't exist until after the election and when he starts to make fun of him. This is just gross. This, once again, it's just total disgust with these people, man. It's super, super disappointing. And the cherry on top, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. I'm a little upset that I'm using Canada Land as a source. I think that might get me in trouble. That might be illegal because it's like, I don't know if Canada Land is even considered journalism, but I'm pretty sure this is true. Can't take my word for it because it's Canada Land. But the columnist, Brian Lilley, who covers Doug Ford for the Toronto Sun, lives with Doug Ford's press secretary. Lives with. So literally in bed with fake conservative lockdown addict Doug Ford, right? Obviously, you guys knew the answer to the question. You know, can we trust Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun? But you know, it bears for record to get on the record for controlled opposition, of course, and yeah, there's a lot more I'd love to get into, but you know what? I'm almost running for an hour here already. But guys, thank you so much for watching. Is there any super chats that I missed? Let me scroll up here, see if there's anything. Oh, I did miss a super chat. Kenzie calls with $2. Greg, you gotta read chat occasionally. I will try to read the chat more often, okay? I'll try to read the chat more often. It's good to be back. I know that was maybe a little bit more of a rocky episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. We are, it's going to be Canada Day very, very soon. But thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you like the show, you can go to my website, gregwycliffe.com. There are donation options there available. And yeah, I think it's important, like I said earlier, we're getting losses. We're getting losses out there. You know, the globalists are beating us down, but we need to focus on creating wins. We need to focus on organizing professionally and continuing to connect with one another, and also looking at the small wins of saving a soul. That's not necessarily solving the whole problem, but saving the soul. And what I'm going to continue to do on Controlled Opposition is calling out these different demons, because these people need to be called out, because this subversion is a problem. And we need to raise our standards, because it's okay to demand higher standards. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll talk to you next time.